but had never received formal safety training. So we felt that there was more that Island Express as a company, could have done to provide oversight of their operations. And there was probably, I think there was a second part of your question too.
At the same time, I believe I heard that your investigator said that there was no indication the company was uniquely unsafe or a problem operator. I'm just wondering how you square that.
Well, it is hard to square because, as you heard me ask, well, they're the company that had the crash, and you have a company that really we did not find significant glaring issues with the organization. They had canceled a number of flights due to weather, and that's what we want companies to do. They did voluntarily implement an SMS program, but we did not feel that it was robust enough. So, as Bill English said, quoting him loosely here, but bad things can happen to good organizations. And by the same token, the pilot himself, we felt that the pilot, there were many very good glowing comments about the pilot, and I know from experience, having been on this board for almost 15 years, that good people can end up in bad situations.
You're watching News Now from Fox. Right now, we are listening to the full announcement from the National Transportation Safety Board Committee as they addressed what caused the chopper crash that ultimately led to the death of Kobe Bryant, his daughter, and 7 others. Right now, I am joined with Michael Bisek. He is the president of the Helicopters Experts, joining us from San Antonio. Michael, are you joining us from a helicopter right now?
Yes, I'm in an aircraft here in San Antonio area. That's correct.
Is this aircraft any similar to the aircraft that Kobe Bryant and 7 others were in when it crashed?
No, ma'am. This is a VFR aircraft, a small training helicopter that's used for training in non-instrument flight conditions.
Okay, just wanted to get some background information on that. So, Michael, we were just listening to the most recent update from the NTSB. What can you tell us about the findings? Right now, we do know that they're saying pilot error is what ultimately led to the crash.
Well, the reality of it is it likely was pilot error, and it's a common pilot error. In fact, I can safely say that 95 or a large part of the major accidents and fatal accidents that occur in small aircraft are from flying into bad weather during poor weather conditions.
Michael, can you kind of explain to us exactly what spatial disorientation is?
Yes, well, first of all, it'd be good for me to explain some basic things about helicopters. And it's safe to understand that helicopters are a very unstable machine. They have to be flown at all times. And there's really 3 different ways to operate a helicopter to keep it safe. And one of those is by simply looking outside, and that's what we call VFR, Visual Flight Rules, weather conditions. And although visual flight conditions are the minimum allowable weather to operate an aircraft, you have to have visual perception, you have to have ability to see outside, see the horizon, and see the ground. And in order to fly that way, you need to be able to operate the helicopter with all the flight controls at the same time. And without the cyclic control, the collective and the pedals, the aircraft's difficult to control. Another way to operate the helicopter is with instrument flight rules, where the helicopter pilot and the aircraft are set up for flying in instrument conditions, which is clouds. And those kind of flights require the pilot to do a lot of pre-flight planning, have an aircraft that's capable of flying in those conditions for the entire flight, and they'll file a VFR flight plan or an IFR flight plan so that they can safely maneuver the aircraft and report when they get back. The third way to operate a helicopter in these kind of conditions is simply to have an autopilot that can get you safely out of those conditions and keep the aircraft stable. And for VFR flight, you have to keep the aircraft controlled with regard to what we call pitch, and that's nose up and nose down, and roll, which is turning or banking left or right, and yaw, which is going to the right or left. All 3 of those flight conditions, accesses of aircraft have to be controlled with the pilot. And the only way to safely do that is to have visual sight with your eyes to the terrain and to have unplugged ears. You couldn't have a cold or anything because your body really relies on your vision and your ear canals to sense how the aircraft's operating. And what very likely happened here is when the pilot went from VFR conditions, which is marginal weather like you see today, or they flew into the cloud by accident. The pilot had to go from VFR conditions, which is looking outside, to simply using the instruments. And a certain amount of time occurs before the pilot's brain can transfer from flying VFR into IFR, especially if it's not planned. And that could result in the helicopter pilot losing control of the aircraft. And what really happens is once your eyes lose sight of the horizon, you're simply relying on the ear canals to sense the motion of the aircraft. And once that aircraft gets into, for example, a slow turn during flight, which can't be sensed by looking outside if there's no visual perception, the ear canal cannot sense a very slow change in aircraft attitude. Because of that, the pilot may abruptly make a control input, and then the ear starts to sense that motion, and the pilot can then over-control the aircraft and get it into a condition where either it's turning or pitching up or pitching down, and ultimately lose control of the aircraft because the pilot thinks that the aircraft's in control and has no visual cues of what's going on outside. And this has contributed to the largest cause of general aviation accidents, flying into bad weather conditions.
Now, the agency did mention that they criticized his decision to fly into the clouds. What can you tell us about the visual flight rules?
Well, you know, the reality about that is the visual flight rules that are required, there's a very minimum weather that a pilot can fly in, is really not that good of weather. We're talking about a half-mile visibility. Well, that's looking outside the windshield of the helicopter for about 8 city blocks. That's what a half mile is. That's not very far. And the regulations also require that we do not fly in the clouds. Well, just looking outside right now, I don't have VFR conditions. I don't have a half mile. And it's all clouds around us this morning here in Bulverde, Texas, where we're based. And those conditions require a lot of pilot aptitude and skill. Just to even operate in the minimum conditions, you have to have a way out. The unique thing about a helicopter is you can always land. And, you know, if there's any open area around you and the weather's looking worse, land the darn helicopter and live.
Now, board members also, during a unanimous vote, voted that self-induced pressure from the pilot is part of what ultimately led to the crash. Now, you've been a pilot yourself for several years. Do you think that self-induced pressure from certain clients may lead to higher expectations?
Absolutely. The pressure we get from customers that rely on us to get them from point A to point B, especially celebrities and people that are really, really highly known by the public. And everybody wants that flight. Everybody wants to take that person. They'll do whatever they can to achieve that flight. And often that flying into bad weather could cause it. Or running out of gas is another thing that happens when people try to fulfill these flights. And really what it is, it's a attitude called the macho flight attitude, which is a dangerous flight attitude that can be induced on a pilot by trying to fulfill a flight that can't safely be done.
So obviously these recommendations are in place for a reason, and this was a very high profile crash. Do you expect to see any updated recommendations moving forward?
Well, I will say that there's been a lot of focus on flight instructors by the FAA to concentrate on human factors. And human factors are things that get in our way. It's like driving down the highway in your car and texting. We know it's not safe, but you could just put yourself into a situation where you can ultimately kill innocent people by an accident. Helicopters are no doubt the same thing. We have to maintain our professionalism, fly in weather conditions that are safe. If you have to fly in those minimum VFR conditions, you have to leave yourself an out. Go ahead and land. I'd much rather land with a celebrity on board and say, hey, look, we can't do it. I've got to stop and drop you off. And I've done this several times in my career.
Michael Bisek, President of Helicopter Experts, joining us from San Antonio. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Right now,
Thank
some
you
of
very
our
much.
viewers
It's a
will see
pleasure to be able to
quick
share.
commercial
Thank you
break.
so much.
Thank you.